Providence is a word with which we are certainly familiar. Some of you may live on a Providence road. The Western Mainline telephone directory really reveals that there is a Baptist church called Providence, carpet store, dental, eye, legal, and medical associations all bearing the name Providence. But that is not the end of it. You will also find a Providence Hearing Aid Center, a motel, a monthly meeting, and a monument company, not to mention the Providence Restaurant and Bar and the Providence Veterinary Clinic. Some businesses prefer the adjectival form of the word. Thus, we have the Provident distributors, the Provident Mortgage Company, the Provident Mutual Life Insurance Company, and the Provident National Bank.
You're going to have that last one.
So we know the word well enough, but what we may not know or remember as often as we should is that providence is a technical term for one of the more important Christian doctrines. The conviction that your history and mine and the world's are held securely in God's hands and ultimately are guided by God toward the fulfillment of God's ends and purposes. Abraham Lincoln put it this way: though with our limited understanding we may not be able to comprehend it, yet we cannot but believe that he who made the world still governs it. That God has a goal for human history and that God is moving history inexorably toward the fulfillment of that goal is central to the Christian's affirmation of faith. Inexorable is the critical word in that affirmation. It describes something which cannot be moved or influenced by persuasion or entreaty, unrelenting or inflexible. And that leads some to understand providence in fatalistic or deterministic terms. Thus, everything which happens, whether good or bad, is decreed by God, and there's little or nothing we can do about it. As oppressive as that notion is on the one hand, it is strangely liberating on the other hand, because it absolves us of any responsibility for our own behavior. We're merely actors in a drama, the script of which is fixed, unchangeable, and non-negotiable. But that notion has no biblical support whatsoever. I return often to this from the pen of the theologian Paul Tillich. Providence does not mean a divine planning by which everything is predetermined, as in an efficient machine. Rather, providence means that the demonic and destructive forces within ourselves and our world never have an unbreakable grasp upon us, and that the bond which connects us with the fulfilling love of God can never be disrupted. At the risk then of leading us into an inherent contradiction, Jack wanted to show you that the providence of God, the ways in which God governs human events, are both inexorable and flexible. It is the beginning and the ending of history which are inexorable, but that which comes between them is flexible. Analogies are hard to come by, which is why Jack kept using a particular one. And here it is. He would say, let's say that history began on Cadillac Mountain in Maine's Acadia National Park, place where the dawn first breaks on American soul. And that history will end in, where do you want to spend eternity? Maybe San Diego, California. The beginning and the ending are inexorable, fixed by God, non-negotiable. More than that, God has mapped out for us the best route to take our journey from Cadillac Mountain to San Diego. However, and here's the gospel's astonishing news, the omnipotent God, the creator of the universe, is willing to negotiate the route, accommodating God's itinerary to our fears and frailties. And thus we come today to the human factor in the providence of God. So we turn to our text, and in it we find that Moses was doing nothing more profound than minding his own business. He was tending his father-in-law's flock of sheep when his curiosity was more than a little aroused by a bush which appeared to be burning, yet was not burning up. So he walked over to have a look at it, and there followed one of the more fascinating conversations ever recorded. So fascinating that Jack couldn't imagine that anyone could have ever possibly made it up. The voice which came from that bush demanded that Moses remove his sandals because he was standing on holy ground, an act of submission and respect. And then, when the voice identified itself as God, the God of your father, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, Moses hid his face because everyone knew that to look on God could be fatal. And the voice went on. I've observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I've heard their cry. I know their sufferings, and I have come to deliver them. Please make note of this. The God who created this world did not then step back, detached to watch it spin, or to turn aside altogether to pursue some other form of entertainment. This God observes, hears, knows, delivers. God is a verb, and by God's actions is he known. And so here is that verb's agenda, the itinerary, Providence Road, we might call it. I have come to deliver them from the Egyptians and to bring them to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And the voice went on. So come, Moses, I will send you to Pharaoh to bring my people out of Egypt. Now here's where the fun begins. First, observe this. God needs Moses. That startling statement could be said in a more circular theoretical way. For example, God chooses to work through human agency. But that's not the gospel. God needs Moses in order to fulfill the purposes of his providence. There is the awesome good news which begins to draw you and me more deeply into this story. Suddenly, the Exodus has become a human enterprise. God and human history are about to be joined irrevocably at the hip. And Moses, standing there, barefoot and blindfolded, is instantly wary and wants no part of it. That I would do such a thing, he shoots back. Holiness hardly intimidated this fellow. His objection was typical. Why me? But more than that, there was a reason for it. He is being summoned to do a remarkably dangerous deed. The Israelites don't trust him, supposing him to be an Egyptian in disguise. And the Egyptians have a bounty on his head, which is the reason he's in Midian, meandering the hillsides behind a flock of sheep. Yet he is the one called by God to confront an enormous imperial power. Moses' objection is legitimate, and God takes it with utmost seriousness and uncommon patience. Is your relationship with God sufficiently intimate to argue with him and hold your own? There's a question this story ought to raise for us. Here is one commentator's insight. Those who are brought close to God retain their integrity, even in moments of closest contact. They are not merely passive recipients, but active, even opposing respondents. There is true address and response, genuine give and take. The human partner has a say in shaping the direction and the outcome of events. I'm not asking you to do this alone, God says. I will be with you, which assurance left Moses unpersuaded. Just who are you anyway? He countered, because everybody's going to want to know. There follows the enigmatic, I am who I am.
Lamb,
The proper translation of Yahweh is important, but the deeper issue is what, if anything, of God does the name reveal? Some say that it reveals nothing at all, that I am who I am means little more than my name is none of your business. But such would be inconsistent with the nature and purpose of this conversation. I am who I am means I will be God for you at all times and places, one who you can count on, never arbitrary or capricious, always faithful to the purposes of my providence. Yahweh, the name by which God chooses to be known, was revealed through Moses's persistence. Observe that, and this much more. In giving his name, God has chosen to compromise his transcendence. A certain intimacy comes in knowing a name. The person whose name we know is more available to us, more accessible, more vulnerable. God's name can now be abused as well as honored. And in revealing his name, Yahweh demonstrates his willingness to risk a broken heart. If your notion of God is of one who is remote and not to be trifled with, then I hope this fascinating story is beginning to amend your understanding. One might think that by now Moses would have capitulated, but far from it. Even if I tell them your name, what makes you think that Israel, let alone Pharaoh, will listen to me? Says Moses. Another perfectly legitimate question, which God takes seriously, although what follows is troubling to some. Moses is equipped with the power of magic, a staff that turns into a snake and back into a staff again, and the capacity to turn water into blood. Why would God stoop to such trickery? Because it is the way of God to accommodate himself to human realities. And Egypt was then the magic capital of the world. Centuries later, there were those who discounted Jesus' miracles as nothing more than stunts that he learned during his own sojourn in Egypt. When one's power and authority are authenticated by one's ability to perform magic, then God equips his human agents to be magicians. I do believe that at this point in the conversation, Jack, he says, would likely have called it quits. And he asks, wouldn't you as well? But not our friend Moses. He doesn't sign on easily, nor is he yet out of excuses. Oh, my Lord, he began, and don't let that pious invocation fool you. I've never been eloquent, neither in the past, nor even now that you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. God's rebuttal is cast in proper God language, but here is the nub of it. Don't you think I know that? I'm not deaf. For 20 minutes, I've listened to you stutter and stammer and whine, but I'm capable of working in and through every conceivable human impediment to fulfill the purposes of my providence. The Apostle Paul got the point. Do you remember his thorn in the flesh? Poor eyesight, some have speculated. Epilepsy, others believe, but more likely an embarrassing stutter. 3 times I appealed to the Lord about this, that it would leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. So I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Simon and Andrew, James and John, and all the others discovered that same grace as well. Come, follow me, Jesus said. I need you, warts and all. But Moses still refused to give in. Oh, my Lord, please send someone else. And then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. Jack says that frankly, that came to him as somewhat of a relief to know that there is a limit even to the patience of God, that we can divert but never finally deter the purposes of providence. Divert, yes, we have the capacity to force God to choose plan B. No, I will not send someone else, God told him. But I will send you your brother Aaron. You will be told what to tell him, and he will be your mouthpiece. Without a word, Moses turned from the bush toward a meeting with Aaron and on to Egypt. An incredible story that we will continue next week. Clearly, it was never God's intention to involve Aaron, who may have been more eloquent, but who had weaknesses all his own. But God goes with what is possible, and that is the gospel for you and for me. The journey begins on Cadillac Mountain. That is non-negotiable. And it will end in San Diego. That is non-negotiable. And God is prepared to place in our hands a triptych, highlighting the best route to take from Egypt to Canaan and from Easter to eternity. But in his infinite mercy, God is willing to negotiate the route, accommodating the itinerary of his providence to our fears and our frailties. And why would he do that? According to Jack, the answer took his breath away. It's because God needs you and me.